Next, I'm excited to introduce to you a gentleman by the name of Chris Denson. He is an award-winning innovator, a marketer, a recovering comedian. He is the host of the Innovation Crush podcast that has well over 750,000 subscribers around the world. He's been a guest speaker, a curator, he's an attendee of over hundreds of different industry events. And Chris is an expert at uncovering the best thinking and commonalities across in a diverse array of cultures. He applies his expertise to the likes of the White House, the Arts, is it Basel, Miami? The Omnicom Media Group. His work has been featured in Adweek, in Forbes, at New York Times, to name a few. He is also the author of Amazon's #1 best-selling book called The Crushing the Box of 10 Essential Rules for Breaking the Essential Rules. A series of personal and professional examinations of what it takes to be an innovator. It's exciting to have Chris here this morning. Just a few additional highlights that I've read of his past year to give you a sense of the places and spaces that he helps others unlock innovation potential include a mentor for Google Launchpad. He's on the advisory board of XXSW, Accelerator HubSpot, Pluto TV, and CT Montreal. He's a creator, he's a producer, he's a host. He's a facilitator of the YouTube Creators Summit and Brainstorm Sessions.
Keep going.
I'm going. I've got time. He's an influencer. He works with Samsung, one of my favorite Lululemons, Council of Excellence at the White House. He's a television host. He's a judge. I'll clarify that. CES Innovation Awards judge. Innovator in residence. He's a jury member for the Interactive Emmys. And more importantly here today, he's a speaker and he's our keynote speaker. Let's welcome, please, Chris Denson to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. All right, that was lively. That was good. One more time, though. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yeah, all right, cool. I think we all came to play today, but nobody came to play like Rob's. Please stand up, Rob, because this jacket, look at that. Look at that thing. It literally has music notes on it. He literally came to play. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the intersection of innovation and empathy. I think as creators all in this room, we're designing and innovating and really thinking hard about like what's next. And you can't do that without truly understanding, having a deep understanding with the folks that you are actually creating for. So for about 4.5 years, I ran the innovation practice at Omnicom Media Group. If you're unfamiliar, it is the largest media agency in the world. So a lot of billboards, print ads, digital media banners, et cetera, et cetera. So out of 12,000 employees around the world, there were 20 of us kind of focused on what's around the corner in terms of culture and technology and consumer psychology and all these different things and applying that to our clients' businesses. So I actually stole this top line here, insights, ideas, results, because that was the company's moniker. Every idea started with an insight. So I think Joanne had a really great one as far as like how they founded their company, right? And so how do we understand the consumers and the things that we're creating? And those lead us to really good ideas, if we identify pain points and different things. And obviously those things are always rooted in some form of result. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that intersection of empathy. I've also wrapped it neatly in a cheesy acronym. So we're not going to get to the acronym just yet, but anybody know who this guy is or what it is? All right, cool. So this guy is named Dan Goods. Dan was an early guest on my show, and he's become a really good friend. He is NASA's artist in residence. He's been there for about 17 years now, helping craft missions, turning all their scientific discoveries into public art experiences, helping design conference rooms, helping engineers flowerize, if that's a word, make their missions a little bit more flowery, because these scientists have to actually pitch to NASA to do the missions, like the missions to Mars, et cetera, et cetera. This image here, he had a project where he asked an engineer to drill a hole in a grain of sand. And when he gives a talk, he talked about this idea that, the entire known universe, if you compared it to grains of sand, would fill up 6 rooms with sand. This hole in this grain of sand represents the Milky Way and the 3 surrounding galaxies. So just this idea of like putting things in different perspectives. The reason I kind of chose him, he's actually sort of the anchoring story in the first chapter of my book. And that chapter is entitled Swim Like an Otter. Dan actually, when he was in art school, he had a professor who said, hey, draw me a picture of an otter. And Dan did his assignment, he turned it in. And the next day, his professor goes, okay, tomorrow, meet me at the pool. And so Dan shows up at the pool. He's like, bring your trunks. So he has his swim trunks. The professor shows him a video of an otter swimming. And he says, now get in the water and swim like one. And, it just really got me thinking about this idea of empathy. What are the depths that we're going to truly understand the subjects that we're creating for? And so obviously you had to redo the assignment and did it much better the second time, even though it was very good the first time. So this idea that, just creating a space, quite literally, based on the title of the slide, for innovation to happen. So I'm going to show you guys a quick video and then return to the stage.
For most, the average film-going experience is completely passive. So for the film Into the Storm, we created an immersive 4D activation featuring the Oculus Rift DK2. We invited users into a custom booth that included gusts of wind and intense bass rumbling as we put the user in a scene inspired by the film. They were then able to share a live feed of the experience with their social networks. And this is how we made it. We started with a glass booth that housed 4 industrial fans that ramped up to 1400 RPM, 2 80 psi air compressors overhead, and beneath each seat were 1000 watt low-frequency audio transducers for body-shaking bass rumbles. We incorporated visual effects including 3D models and digital set pieces from the actual film. The scene was built using the Unity game engine for its real-time physics and tight integration with the Oculus Rift SDK. The Unity simulation, content servers, and Arduino controllers were all seamlessly integrated and housed within the glass booth. And this is the result.
This is as close as you can be to being in the film. It's like you're there. It's like you're in the tunnel. And then you see the truck come up against the grate. I felt like I was in a real-life tornado. I saw things flying to the left, flying to the right.
Rush open the other end!
Premiering at the San Diego Comic-Con, the activation has traveled across the US, down to Latin America, and over the Atlantic to Europe. Almost immediately, the activation generated a large buzz via online articles, industry blogs, social media, and word of mouth, with the Into the Storm hashtag reaching almost 7 million impressions and counting. The results are clear, that movie fans were thrilled to become a part of the film.
Thank you. How many of you actually saw the movie? Exactly. $300,000 wasted. That was actually done in 2014, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about experimentation. Told you it was going to be a cheesy acronym. And so, again, there was a big experiment. In 2014, we did this. We launched it at Comic-Con, as you saw. And at that time, there were only 2 VR experiences. One was this one, which was the only 4D VR experience, and the other one was Game of Thrones, when you got to climb the wall. And so, by the time South by Southwest rolled around about 8 months later, there were 38 VR activations. So we were early movers in sort of, let's experiment and see what we can do and create around this in VR. And so it just became this really great, just first step in determining how we go about experimenting? What do we learn from these things? They don't always yield the results that we may be looking for, but they also teach us a lot. So just in exploring the idea of VR, you start to find out that virtual reality is used to treat PTSD and gamifying it, especially USC has a really great project with the military, and they treat soldiers with a mix of virtual therapy and couch time. And they kind of progress and stay in the VR experience longer and longer as they're recreating sort of warlike conditions that gave those subjects PTSD. I got to do an experience in London, but it was a company that was based here in Chicago, actually. And what you got to do was be in the body of an elderly person, and you're sitting at a table, and this is all sort of photorealistic, and your family is singing happy birthday to you, and you can't hear, and you also can't see because you have a blockage in your eye. And so it's just really understanding the experience of what it's like to be, to live the day of a life of someone who has a condition like that. I have a grandmother who died with Alzheimer's, and, I saw a phase of her transition where family was frustrated, right? Because they don't understand. But VR gives you this opportunity to do that. Imagine, doing a day in the life of one of your customers. Where does play come in as a really sense of relief or wonder based on a complete daily journey from wake up to, an argument with your sibling or your parents to going to school or to work, and then doing that all in VR and seeing what that environment is like, and then being able to problem solve for that. Not that this slide is particularly about virtual reality in and of itself, but this idea that experimentation, whether it's artificial intelligence or analog play or cards, it's just this idea that we continue to play and experiment with different things. Anyone want to guess what the next letter stands for? Nobody? What was that? Yes, M. Good job. Thank you. Give this man a spelling bee award. Mental states. So this is actually a visualization of my brain. So sorry, guys. This was an experiment we did with CW and a series called iZombie. And so we partnered with a company called Emotive. You can see their logo at the top of the slide. And Emotive is actually a meditation-oriented device. You put it on your head. It tells you which parts of your brain are most active. It gives you a sense of, alpha, theta, delta, and beta. Which parts are you in a resting mode? Are you in problem-solving mode, et cetera, et cetera? According to this, I was in deep sleep. I don't know how that happened. But and so at this event at South by Southwest, we allowed a bunch of people to do this. They got renderings of their brain, but we also had a 3D printed machine where we 3D printed pieces of brain-shaped candy, and they were all in different colors to match the activity. So essentially, you got to eat your own brain. And so, this is a fun thing, but what it really was a gateway for was every brand makes some form of emotional promise. Right? Whether it's Snickers really satisfies, Wells Fargo done, there's some sort of emotional satisfaction. And now there are tools and resources by which we can actually measure those promised effects. So using Emotive and being able to do that is like really understanding how consumers are reacting to a moment, to each other, to the product that you are providing them, and just finding different ways of understanding. Yes, you can fill out a comment card, but it's a lot easier to do sort of, we almost did this for Warner Brothers. There's a wristband that measures your heart rate, your body temperature, your volume, all these different things. And imagine sitting there and watching a film and not having to tap on a tablet, or you are actually getting the person's most natural reaction. So it's looking at this idea of like, how are we solving for emotional states? And you're keeping that in mind, especially as when times are a little bit more in turmoil. There's a collective consciousness around experiences and what people want to see. You'll see, like, I think there's some thinking around the idea that during very tumultuous times, you see a lot of nostalgic movies, right? So you start to see like, oh, that was a movie from my childhood. And so Hollywood starts to make these movies to actually make people feel better about the times that we're living in. You've also got individual states of mind. And not only just for the products and the marketing and things like that, think about the people that you work with, really understanding who you're creating with, who's next to you, really understanding like, all right, here's some really great ways for us to understand what's going on emotionally as well as mentally, and, solving for the crazy coworker. Next is this idea of partnership. I had nothing to do with this project, but it was something that I really found interesting. Last year, Spotify and Ancestry launched a partnership. And what happened was, if you did your DNA test, you could, it would tell you your top 5 origins, the places that you come from. And with that information, Spotify would design a playlist based on those 5 origins. So a very personalized playlist. If you're from Sri Lanka and Africa and also parts of Asia, you would get a playlist with artists from that region. And so as I was thinking about this idea of partnerships, in that particular instance, the folks at Spotify, one of their big goals is we super serve our artists, right? If you're Justin Bieber, of course you can be discovered. How many Justin Bieber fans today? I knew there's always one. There's always one. There's always one. But if you're not Justin Bieber, right, and you are an artist from another region of the world, how do you super serve that? I had a chance to interview Alex Bodman, Spotify's global creative director, and that's what he was talking about. So, it's easy to have that Justin Bieber discovery, but if I'm an artist from another part of the world, this is a great way to do that. And for the Ancestry folks, it's another way to super serve your customer. How do you give them other brand extensions and experiences that keep them sharing the brand with their friends and family and being engaged on a very regular basis. Again, and when I think about partnerships, I also think about the idea that the more unlikely, the better. The Emotive and CW's zombie example is a perfect one because Emotive really looks at themselves as a medical device. They were like, we are hard science, we wear lab coats, we don't mess with zombies. And CW's like, yeah, but it is a zombie show. And so we had to do a lot of creative negotiation between those two partners to really get them to understand one another, to learn from one another, and actually create something that won them both a few awards and really raised the bar on visibility. And so, it's just this idea that you don't have to go it alone. I think the other part of partnership means that you get a sneak peek into other organizations and how they work and operate. I think that, just even the sneak peek that Joanne gave us with the grommet is like, okay, you're walking away with different ideas and different things that you can apply to your own day-to-day experience, and so on and so forth. So just as you keep those things in mind, it's like this ability to connect the dots. Sometimes Hilton was one of our clients at OMD, and we pitched this idea of them partnering with Airbnb. They literally laughed when we told them this, but I was like, if you think about it, right? If I stay at a Hilton and Hilton helps me rent out my place, and I'm making money on my stay, and and I'm renting out my place, and and I'm a Hilton Diamond member. That is a great benefit for this partnership, and it's a win-win. You're creating frenemies, and so you look at these ideas of like, where can we connect dots where people aren't necessarily seeing them when it comes to partnership? All right. Asking questions. I get to do this a lot. I've done 240 episodes of my show. And so just being able to be nosy with people. This image here is actually from an event we put together at South by Southwest this year called Gov City. And it was a 2.5-day think tank for a bunch of government entities. We had the head of innovation for the U.S. Census Bureau. Shout out to 2020. Everybody get counted. We also, this gentleman is the Chief Science and Technology Officer from Homeland Security. We had NASA in the room, as well as inviting other individuals like Reddit, UrbanX, which is BMW and Mini's Civic Accelerator, Spartan Race. So the idea was to kind of create this sort of mashup community where people are rubbing elbows with people that they wouldn't normally get to, and also share some really tried and true difficulties. As you guys are all inventing in this room, it's really easy to get in the garage and like start tinkering around with plastics and fabrics and and cards. But in government, it's a lot harder, right? There's so much more yellow tape. So when you look at innovation as a process, it's very difficult sometimes, especially in environments like that. The asking questions part comes in because over the course of a week, I looked at my calendar a few weeks ago, and I was like, there was one period where I had 40 phone calls with potential attendees to this event. That was just 1 week, and we spent 3 or 4 months planning this because we wanted to curate the room with the right individuals. We wanted to ask and understand what their problems are, and after 100 or so phone calls, and we're looking for 50 people to be in this room, you get a really deep understanding of where the dots are connecting on their common common problems, their common opportunities, their common mindsets, the difficulty, all the different things that go into making this event for 2.5 days, programming it and making sure that we're talking about the right topics and solving the right problems. In fact, that the series of phone calls led us to this theme for the event called resiliency in the era of innovation. For a lot of the government entities, it's about building resiliencies. I live in California, hence no socks today. I'm wearing socks, they're just low profile. So, but there were fires in Malibu, and there was one organization that was dedicated to resiliency in fire and emergencies, and like, how do we reroute water supplies, but then also like the emotional resiliency it takes just from an entrepreneurial standpoint, this idea of grit and the things that it takes to make your vision happen. We actually kicked the session off with a general who helped Spartan Race launch their military practice, and we talked all about like the emotionality of creating things, because that journey is something that we don't talk about. We talk about the wonder of it, we talk about all the cool stuff that gets created, but we don't talk about how hard it is for a lot of these individuals. So just that idea of asking questions. And it's also just, for me, it becomes a free way to get new superpowers. I used to joke and say I'm like the Siler from Heroes, where I take a little bit of everybody's brain and like now their superpower becomes mine. And that can happen in any conversation, the people that you're with at your table, all those things. And I think on the reverse of it is answering questions. Answering honestly, coming from a place of vulnerability, even with folks that you may not know or be familiar with or readily comfortable with. I think by sharing the underside of your experience, that gives other people, either they're going to feed you with really great information on how they make innovation happen, or, it's just really good to get that off of your chest. So this idea of asking questions becomes a really good, underlooked part of the innovation process in developing empathy. So technology. I was in a car a couple of years ago in an Uber ride, which was deathly quiet, and I was like, "Oh no, I'm going to be one of those murder victims." But I'm here today, and so as we were in the car, I saw this message pop up on the dashboard, and this gentleman hands me a keyboard back, and we start having a conversation via this Apple keyboard. And in that process, I realized that he was deaf. And so I started to think about this intersection of technology and some of the unintended consequences that we create, both good and or bad. But this is really amazing to see someone with a disability actually be able to thrive and have a livelihood and almost, entrepreneurial, thanks to technology and being able to have a conversation and me to get to know. I don't know sign language. It would have been me writing on a piece of paper and handing it back. And so this is a really good way of combining people. But on a broader scale, you start to really open up your lens, because you look at the idea that there's 52 million people in the United States alone that live with disability. And I think there's 1.2 billion around the world. And you start to solve and serve those underrepresented communities, you'd be surprised at what could happen for your business. I hosted Cannes Lions live television broadcast this past June, and one of the winners of a Golden Lion Award was IKEA. IKEA, some agency convinced them to launch a line of furniture and accessories for persons with disabilities. What started off with one sort of test store turned into 113 countries. Because if you think about it, the chairs that you get up out of, or the couch that you sit on, or the way you turn on a lamp, and all these things that we just overlook sometimes, you can super serve a brand new audience in really insightful ways. So this is just one of those things where you start to look and discover other paths for your business and see where, what hasn't been served up for different individuals. And then also the reverse of this one is taking a break from technology. As much as we can, I take my kids to the movies. We all leave our devices at home. We have a lot of device-free time. There are other things like Digital Detox, which is actually a series of events that happen, like camping events. Tanya and I know each other from an event called Hatch, which takes place in the mountains of Montana. But just this idea to disconnect in order to reconnect and kind of refuels your brain in ways that we kind of overlook when we're thinking about creating. All right. Happiness. Everybody likes ice cream, yeah? Cool. I don't have any, but I just want to make sure you liked it. So this gentleman is a guy by the name of Dennis Hong. Dennis Hong was also an early guest on my show. He is one of the top roboticists in the world. He and his technicians have identified 7 species of robot. And so, as we started talking about his career, he's also a best-selling young adult author in Korea. He is also a magician. He was also a runner-up on Iron Chef, and also, et cetera. And I'm like, okay, what do all these things have in common? This is part of our conversation. And he goes, after I sat back and thought about it, he's like, I really want to give people happiness. And so I started thinking about the things that we create. At the core of it is happiness, right? We're trying to alleviate pain points for someone's life or give them joy in some way. Will Smith has a quote that I love, which is, if whatever you're doing isn't designed to make someone's life better, then you're wasting your time. And so, I love Dennis's work because as we started, one of the things I was talking about, I was like, oh no, are the robots going to take over? I've seen all these crazy videos of, the mechanical bull, like running through a mall and all these things. And he said, roboticists, we fail all the time. He's like, a lot of those videos are like, if it works, it's probably the 90th take. And so, failure after failure after failure, and still like holding on to happiness, this idea of creating it and also feeling it in the things that he's creating, it becomes a really big part of his journey. Zappos, another great example. Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, it's an e-commerce platform if you're unfamiliar. One of his big tenets is that we're not an e-commerce company, we're a happiness company. And I suggest, if you guys haven't heard, there's a book that he wrote called Delivering Happiness. And it's about that being at the core of their business model. So, again, as we kind of go through these journeys of entrepreneurialism and creation and invention, it comes with a lot of failures, as many of us know. So keeping that idea of happiness at the core is blatantly important. You, or me in this case, you can laugh. You started. You're like, don't feel bad. So I'm gonna just let it sit there I'm gonna just let it simmer. So this is actually an app. So I'm not actually wearing makeup. This is an augmented reality app from L'Oreal that was launched, I want to say 2015 or 2016. It's called Makeup Genius. And you can try any one of L'Oreal's 300 products in their library of products. So I tried on a few, as you can see. And so, as I started thinking about this idea of self, right? This is a selfie, obviously. If you look on Instagram, there at one point there were 300 million hashtags with the term selfie. We think about ourselves a lot. We took a selfie a few minutes ago. So you start to think about that. But also, I'm going to skip to the technology piece of this. When L'Oreal launched this, they saw 14 million downloads in about 3 months. 4.7 million of those came from what part of the world? Anyone? Any guesses? Oh, close. China. And that was a big surprise for them. They were not marketing there. They were not in market there. It was just like, wait, almost a third of our downloads have come from this part of the world. Why is that? Right? And so what they ended up learning was that in China, there's not a tradition of makeup being, and tips and application being handed down from mothers to daughters. It is a relatively new thing there. And so, this is a low risk way of trying on makeup. The younger girls won't go to the department stores and try on lipsticks and eyeliner and things like that. So this became a way of them kind of exploring self-expression in a really interesting way. So, what I find is that we find these surprises that lead us to other data points of empathy. Yes, there's data that may tell us, really good informed decisions, but there's also gut, there's also discovery, there's also a lot of surprises that, if we're keeping our eyes on them and not having our blinders on in achieving our mission, that we have some really great opportunities to entertain and engage and build our businesses. So And also just, when I think about the idea of self, look, I grew up in Detroit, right down the street. I'm a black man. I started off as an engineer. I worked for Chrysler. My credentials were read earlier, so thank you. But, on paper, my career makes no sense. I walk into most rooms, I feel relatively uncomfortable. And so, you start to think about, like, when we walk into a room, whether we're brainstorming or we're in a meeting or we're building something, how much of yourself can you dump into that project? And sometimes we hold back a little bit. One of my favorite examples, I interviewed Miguel McKelvey, the co-founder of WeWork, and the one that nobody talks about. The other one got them in trouble. But the interesting thing was he actually grew up in communal style living. And so, him and his mom and one of her friends, and there were about 5 or 6 kids among them, and they shared all sorts of resources, rides to school, clothes, food, homework assistance, et cetera, et cetera. And it was kind of just built into the DNA of what WeWork was, not the business model, but more so like, how do we super serve these entrepreneurs and really build community? It's in his DNA, and that's one of those things I discover a lot with almost every guest that I talk to, is that there's something in them that's just like an innate behavior, and there's no forethought to it, but it goes right into the things that they create. And it usually makes your job a lot easier. A lot of times we're thinking like, 1,000 feet ahead, where really the solutions are right here in front of you, and these things that we kind of overlook. So I think, we all owe it to ourselves to really be ourselves as much as we can every day, emotional states, happiness, all those different things into the things that we create. So as we wind down, every guest that I bring on, I ask them to complete this phrase to me, or for me, and innovation to me is fill in the blank. And it's, again, back to that last point, it's such a personal experience in a lot of ways. Damon John from Shark Tank said, innovation to me is to effectively empower and change people's lives. And I think through play we do that, through the things that we create, through the people that you're going to meet over the next few days, you're going to do that. So I'll spare you sort of the wind down piece of this, but you guys really understand it. So with that said, I thank you for your time. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but thank you guys for your attention just now.